Falcha Rovas Jacharish Hig Ardan Shaw and Darna Pod Creelu destroy Hatamaja Johnny More Cud the Kelleru Kevenirachta August Ahasan Donorum Birch Ella a Horchas Jahan Shaw Hig Aris Nawal. You're all very welcome into our Ardan podcast, and I'm delighted to be joined today by two other guests, the Reverend David CLosson from West Kirk in the Shankill, and Chips Fusco, community worker and Republican ex-prisoner from the Lower Falls, if I'm allowed to say that.
I don't think it doesn't, yeah.
There's always fights about the Lower Falls. They were worse than the Lower Shankill. So I want to just start by asking you to introduce yourselves. Much better you do that than I do. So who's Dave CLosson? What's he doing?
So I'm the minister of West Kirk Presbyterian, which is on the Shankill Road. I've been there as minister for 10 years. Moved to the Shankill from East Belfast, the Far East, Ballybean. I grew up in Ballybean. So I'm a blow-in here. I've only been here 10 years, but I've been very, very warmly welcomed and hope I'm part of the community. And so that's how I'm here today. I think with the link with Albert Street, we'll maybe come to that later on, which was on the Falls. And this is the 50th anniversary of the amalgamation of Albert Street and Argyle Place to make West Kirk. And that's
brilliant. So we're in the middle of all sorts of anniversaries. Chips, you know, the yous have just celebrated the 50th anniversary of the curfew of the Falls, and it was in that kind of period of turbulence that Albert Street moved and amalgamated with Argyle Street. But tell us first of all, who's Chips Fusco?
Well, that's a question. I'm still trying to work that out. Well, I mean, as I said, I grew up, I was born in Dumble Street. Well, and I think that's where my family lived. So, and you say classmates of community work, I suppose I am, but more specifically, run a youth club down in the Davis area.
Right.
The last 25 years. It's called the Frank Gillen Centre. It's actually named after a local community activist who was instrumental with others in Davis Flats at demolition. So they named it in his honour when Davis got demolished. So I run the youth club with others for the last 25 years out of the Frank Gillen Centre, just promoting young people's development. It's brought as a development was we can skill them up with all the life skills to try and deal with issues which every day. So that's really what I've been doing 25 years along with other issues. I'm big into the local community as well, history, especially the last 40, 50 years, stuff like that there. So it's a passion, it's most youth work it is, it's not a 9 to 5 job, you know what I mean, it does push you, but it's great, it's like a vacation, so a firm of vacation, as they say. So that's really what I'm doing is primarily, I mean, young people, and that takes into all sorts of type of things with cross-community work and cultural work within the area, about the history of the area and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay, so Chips, you're also an Irish language speaker, and I know that your daughter, Brona, is a fairly key figure in the Irish language community in the city. Actually a classmate of my eldest daughters. But they're a generation of very positive, outward-looking, confident young people. And we'll come back maybe to the role of the Irish language in your community later. But to bring the two of you together today was really an attempt to look at, you know, there are very intertwined histories all over this city, but we're a very divided city. We're a city that's divided by barriers, by population movement that occurred with the outbreak of the conflict in the late 60s. We're also a community that is deeply divided by allegiances and politics. But the more we can make those reconnections, because I mean the church that now operates in West Kirk was for a long time centred in Albert Street. So what are the connections that you see today between Albert Street as it was and the West Kirk as it is? Do they exist or do they not?
So I think maybe in any other city on earth there may be a connection there, but because this big wall comes and divides, it's a big keep out wall. and there's no, it sends out that message to both sides, and I think that's a shame. But that has brought a real disconnect, which probably should be there. The connection should be there, and that connection is simply historic. It's there in people's hearts. We have still people who have real fond memories of work in that area and being part of that area and being loved by their neighbours. But then when everything broke out and they simply couldn't get there because of all that was going on, they had no other choice but to port and join with the church in Argyle Place. So there is still an emotional connection when I talk to people. Those older folks within the congregation, they have a real love, not just a nostalgia, but a real love for how their neighbours treated them and loved them at the time, and heartbreak at having to leave. So we'd like to rekindle a relationship.
You mentioned the key point, which is very relevant there when you said about the connection, because I also do a wee bit of work with the local football team, Magalata, which comes from Our Lady, the Immaculate Conception. That's where it comes from historically in the 40s. But in recent things, when the start of the football's back, a lot of our matches are played up in the Hammer.
Yes.
It's really, so we meet at the Frank Gillen, and it takes us literally 2 minutes to go up Albert Street, through the Shankill and into the Hammer. And it's literally quicker than getting there to go to my house. It's just it's up the road. But and you're right, geographically 2 seconds, but you're psychologically a million miles away. And that's the important thing. It's so close, because remember 77 bus and all? Yeah. It's literally, as you say, the wall and all.
But that wall has divided us.
And that's the sad thing.
And I think the people, when I meet people from both sides of that wall, we're the same people. The same type of people, the same type of working class type of folks.
Well, aside from our political differences, I mean, we essentially are inner city working class Belfast people. So I mean, at that level, there's obvious interconnections which have been divided, but which still exist. And I'd like you, Chips, because there are different realities around the same thing. There are different perceptions. So 1971 for you, living in the Falls, was a very turbulent period. Tell us a bit about that as a child and how that influenced you.
Well, I do tours still. I do tours working for Custodianship, and the hour and a half tour is the conflicting stories, and then we go up onto the Lanark Way and hand over, which is good. So it shows even where the walls are. We're handing people over in a nice way to people from the other side who will then do the tour. And one of the stories I tell about, one of my first sort of things is during internment, I was reading the paper at the top of Dummel Street when a soldier just come over and just snapped it out of my hand on a personal thing. And I said, "What are you doing? Take my paper." I was just reading the paper, top of the street, and there was trouble obviously that time. The soldiers were everywhere. He said it's been commandeered by Her Majesty's forces. I always remember that phrase, and I'm saying, "You big bully," and everything. So something like that sort of really still sticks in my head, So even things like that there, wee instance where I seen, and I still. Part I can really tell my experience, the soldiers weren't good for me, but I seen, and I seen good for my family, good for the community. So that was growing up, or just, and then you seen Bloody Sunday, just you were sort of climatised by events. And when you're still young, you hadn't got the politics which you probably have now. Obviously, you can go and rationalise a lot of stuff politically, but then you were just sort of, I suppose, young, you were just reacting, but you just seen yourself as just under pressure from the soldiers. That's what it was like.
Well, that sort of period, I mean, and I want you to reflect upon this, Dave. It was huge upheaval. So there were people leaving their homes, or people being burnt out of their homes, and the kind of perception on the Falls was that all of that upheaval was one way, that Catholics were being forced out of their homes. It was a pogrom, but there was also a whole uprooting of a Protestant community from that. What became the shatter zone, or the peace wall. And from recollections of your own congregation, what are their memories of that period?
So their memories of that period were, I hear the story now and again of the first deployment of tear gas which was apparently on a Sunday afternoon, and they know that because the Sunday school had to be closed down, and the kids had to be sent home, and there was things like that just made it impossible to meet there. So that was there's those recollections. Recollections too of just rioting on the streets and trouble on the streets, and it just being impossible to get there. And Mr. Moore, who was a minister there in Albert Street and then in Westkirk, he was the first minister of Westkirk. He was on the street one night visiting folks, and there was another deployment of the tear gas or whatever. And someone says to him, Father, get in here, come in here and shelter yourself, you know. So it was that upheaval. But on the other side, as I listen, you know, to exactly the same stories of, you know, you're saying about Catholics being put out of their homes, on the, you know, the Crumlin Road side of things, the stories there would be, because we've amalgamated with them, and as I visit the older folks there, them being forced out of their homes, you know, up in that community. So these things were going on, and it's a mirror image, you know, isn't it, of the sides.
Well, that's it. I mean, it's always communities are caught in the middle of any upheaval. But how do you? I mean, we're almost 2 generations away from that upheaval. How do we begin with all of that baggage? And nobody should be asked, in my view, to leave their baggage behind them. You take your baggage with you. But how do you reconcile that in terms of reaching out to the other? Because really, we have become othered. Mm-hmm. You know, if I met you in any other city in the world, we would be, as you say, close near neighbours.
Neighbours, yeah.
You know, so how do you start unpicking that, Chips? What are the opportunities and what are the challenges of doing that? You know, coming from the Falls and trying to make reconnections with a community that lived there for so long.
And I get a lot of questions when I do the tour, because I'm making clear I have my own personal history and the political background, but also when I bring you up and hand you over, I won't say hand you over.
I know what you mean, yeah.
Not hand you over. Nicely, I will always shake the other and the loyalist hand, and that'll be just to say, disagree politically, but that's as far as it goes with not personal. Neil, do you ever go out for a drink? But when I say no, it sounds bad as if I don't like him, but I also make a point, because we're moving to different circles. I say if a man would have a drink in the town or whatever, but you understand, it sounds it will come across, but that's as far as, because just for me, certainly I would like from him, just political difference. He's a large pro-base, I'm a Republican, so but that's as far as it goes. There's nothing personal or anything about it. But you're right, but coming back to the thing, I mean, with young people and all, and there's all these different groups together building united communities, part of the strategy that we're going to be involved in with young people. It has to begin at all levels, obviously, certainly, and part of my job is to try and encourage young people, because I used to say the story when many years doing youth work, when you were, not as much now, thank God things have moved on a wee bit, I suppose, but we used to ask, who here hates Protestants? And everybody puts their hand up. And then you'd ask this question, who here has ever met a Protestant? These are all young people. No hands go up. You understand? So you've got that sort of still it's there. And the wall and all this stuff goes in the wall. And I say, I hate the wall. I hate the wall because, I suppose I'm not saying but when you're a wee bit more politicised and you learn to do it, you know what it represents. You know, but because of what it, because I say when I'm down, I'm not going to attack anybody nor say I won't guarantee it. But when you ask most people will say, why is the wall there? They're not interested in it. It's become so normal. Yeah. And that is the division. It's become normal that don't buy. I'd say the
wall is normal, the divide is normal. And in any other city, even the like a, you know, where there is polarisation in the like of Glasgow, people still live beside each other. You know, they fight when there's a match or something like that.
Yeah, the thing that what I'm picking up from what Chips is saying is that even though we've moved some way towards putting conflict in the past, the reality of those divisions are constantly reinforced by the fact that people don't travel outside their own area. That people, like, how often would you be on the Falls Road?
I know.
How often would you be on the Shangle?
You know? I'll tell you a funny story, right? I think it's funny anyway. I told Bruna this. We were talking about our children's names. And when we first came here, we used to go shopping over in the Kennedy Centre, which, you know, seemed like well into the other side, you know. And I have 3 daughters, Annie, then Elizabeth. Elizabeth, because she was born at Christmas, not after the Queen or anything like that. But surely Lily, a more Shankill Road name you couldn't get. Elizabeth, and then Boaz is our youngest. And I always worried going in there, I'd be found out. And what happened? You know, that's just what you feel. So I was pushing a trolley one day, and you know, you made sure you didn't say too much and you didn't stick out, because that was the perception when we first come over here. So right enough, pushing a trolley, and a man stops us, and he says, 3 beautiful children here. I says, yes. He says, what's this one's name? And it was my son, and I said, Boaz. Oh, he says, that's a lovely name. And he said, this one, and he introduced me to his grandson, and he told me his name, and it was a really Irish name. And he says, but in English, it's such and such. And he said to me, what about your son here? He says, what is his name in English? And I said, there is no English. Oh, he says. And before he asked about Elizabeth, I was away like a shot, you know. But you go and you carry that.
Yeah.
And there's no reason in any other city in the world, but you just have that perception. And here's me. I mean, I'd love to be working class, but I'm probably middle class. You know, my parents moved up and out, and you know, all that. But you still have that.
Yeah.
And growing up, I didn't meet a Catholic until I went to university. That was just the fact of it. Just didn't. Yeah. Grew up in Ballybean, went to local boys' high school, went to Bangor Tech, and then at university, and that's when I started meeting these really decent folk, you know, from all sides. You know,
it's same journey for yourself, Chips. I mean, your world was really defined by the Grosvenor Road, the Falls Road, and the city centre. You know, so how have you made that journey to not feeling a stranger in parts of your own city? Because we've all had it. I mean, you go into an area which is solidly loyalist, and you're going, everybody knows everybody, you know, and you're watching what you say. And
exactly.
You know.
I mean, with Brona, the unique thinger, main thinker, went over with the course when she'd done our university stuff. She'd done obviously the language within the prisons and all, and we had arranged. We went and brought her over to the Abbey Centre in Shankill Road with Plum Smith. And we were over there saying, this is so surreal. This is about 10, 12 years ago, whatever it was. Yep. I mean, well, in the last 15 years, so you were still in the process, but you were still fairly, you know, because of time frame. And your main thinker sitting in the Epic Centre, having a cup of tea, and she's in a wee dictaphone interviewing Plum Smith. And I say, strange fucking times. And the best thinker sent me a big fucking, I had a wee bit of more salts, you know, you can over the back, and the thinker sent me a big t-shirt with Che Guevara on it. Not that it would be safe, but it's not exactly, I would imagine the Che Guevara one, you know, the revolutionary on the Shankill. I'm the thinker, you could have been a wee bit more discreet, you know, that was alright. Yeah. But it just shows you, and he came out and Plum came out and said, I've turned into a wee prod. Yeah, we get to the app, which can happen. People really find, and you do this in the tour, it's so unique when ex-paramilitaries can be generous and be friendly enough, still have their politics, whereas ordinary people have that full of things. Most there because probably we all know who you're involved that way, what it means. You know, you can still have your politics, but you can tolerance and all that stuff. So that the kids, you know, you're trying to promote, have your views, but tolerate other views as well. Have your own political views and debate them. You know?
I remember an incident with me was kind of informative. Myself, this was in maybe 2008, 2009, and we were across doing a project called the Nansen Project, where Fridtjof Nansen was the guy who created the international passport for refugees who were displaced after the First World War, and he that idea of displacement. So we started looking at doing a project around the street names of Belfast and the connections that they could make across different communities. So we were in around the Shankill. There are 3 streets there called Blaney Street, Meanan Street, and I can't remember the third off the top of my head, but they're named after Catholic priests who were all Irish speakers and who were in ministering to people during the smallpox epidemic and the cholera epidemic at the end of the 19th century. And their 3 names were enshrined in street names in the Shankill. So we were over getting photographs of the streets are gone, but they're Blaney Crescent and Blaney Place and all. The names are still there. And I could see these guys down the street and they were a bit suspicious because we were taking photographs. So I says to Fergal Enright, who's with me, I'm going to go down and talk to these guys because they're obviously uncomfortable, they don't know who we are. So I walked down and says, how are you? He says, grand. I says, we're just here, we work for an Irish language project and we're doing stuff for oh, that's all right, he says. We thought about that crowd of dirt from a Sunday world. You know, so it's perspective all the time, you know, that they weren't really worried about the Irish speakers and taking photographs, they're just worried about somebody from one of the newspapers.
Somebody from the Peru.
Somebody from the Peru, that's it. So, I mean, this is just a conversation, but can you see how you would use this conversation in your respective communities to start getting people to walk the ground again, to actually, because there's no distance. I mean, if you walk from the West Cork, 10 minutes.
10 minutes, yeah.
And that's another point that I always make when I do the tours. You see very few people except tourists or cars coming through.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I said that's because rainforest people don't. They don't just, and you say it's so close. I could walk up to the Hammer in 5 minutes in a Saturday for a football match. I drive up, you know me. Bring kids. But you mean you could literally walk there in 5 minutes?
No.
It's just, in geographical terms, it's nothing. But so you say it's a psychological thing. It's so fast, unfortunately, and that's what in everybody's his head, which I suppose, which is a sad thing. Because you're right. You'd walk, or you should be able to walk. Obviously, and just walking down without even thinking of anything, but. You have to start somewhere. I mean, I would love to be able to walk to it. I mean, I have no problems, but I suppose like everything else, you have to worry about your personal security first.
Yep.
That's the reality because of I do the tours. But you're right, but that's for me. But that's the type of society. But as you say, we've travelled so far, but
it's still a long
long. When you have that there, you know what I mean?
But I was just really interested by the photograph that Dave brought in, and it's a photograph of the interior of the Albert Street Church, and I just noticed the beautiful organ that's sitting in the church.
It's a lovely church too. I thought it was very small. Boy, I just remembered from the snooker tables.
Yeah,
but you know,
you'd have known it when it was the community centre afterwards.
Yeah.
But no, it seemed to be a massive church and the history of that building. And that organ was taken, that was a war memorial organ from the First World War, and it was taken to West Cork and installed there.
So you still have the organ that used to sound in Albert Street sounding.
Yeah, in the Kirk.
A couple of 100 yards away on the Kirk. So, I mean, it would be nice in this 50th anniversary year if between the two you could bring the congregation from Albert Street back to what's now the Morning Cheehan Centre, the site, and also bring the people who lived around the Albert Street Church up into the West Cork to hear the organ being played.
Well, Dinkers is in the residence, and they're based in Divis Tower, the residence. They do a lot of work, I'm saying, down across Townsend Street.
Yes,
for the Fusco Forum. So that could probably be a project, because they are trying to bring up the different residents are engaging across there, the meet in Townsend Industrial Estate.
Well, we've come across a number of photographs and heard a number of stories. This year's our 50th anniversary, and it would be good to share those stories, almost to say, look, there's no hard feelings. We went, but you know, that wasn't, it was never our plan, it was never our intention. We didn't go because you know we felt we had to. And the day the last service, which was the 31st of January 1971, all the neighbours came out and applauded and hugged the folks because they, you know,
so obviously a lot of them would still be about.
Yes, some of those folks would still be there, and no hard feelings. And some of our elders who were, some of them have passed away just even recently. So the time would be right to do that, you know, while they're still, some of them are still with us.
Dinkers really big into that, I mean, because with the residents, with the senior citizens, we do it, so it would be interesting to meet up and see what you can put in that.
You see, in terms of, Chips, I can't remember the phrase you used about the young people with your community work, and we've got the West Cork Community Project, and some of the work that we're trying to do there, it just sounds identical to the work that you're trying to do, just to raise that line of sight you know.
Yep.
And I think that's the same issue wherever you are in working class areas in this city. That we talk about aspirational poverty. Yes, there's poverty, but it's this poverty of belief that we're not going to make anything of ourselves. We're here, we're not moving, you know, and there's nothing, you know. And we've tried to do some stuff. We started a wee coding club at one of the forums in the Spectrum Centre. Someone said, look, if we can teach kids from this community about hospitality and about computer coding and technology, we could raise their aspirations. So I took that as an invite to start something, and we started this wee computer coding club just to say to kids, look, you can do this. You know, this future here, that this surrounding this city, you know, with technology, with film production, with music production, you know, this is within your grasp. And that was something similar to what you said, you know, about the young people that you're working with, just raising the line of sight is what we're all about, you know.
So, I mean, the other underlying theme for this year, in terms of celebrating custodianship, is actually getting the people to reflect on what are you a custodian of? Mm-hmm. So what is the essence of Dave CLosson's mission? What are you a custodian of? What are you trying to forward into the future?
Yeah. So I think we want to be, I think, custodians of hope. So we think of, you know, you see hope on Christmas cards, and that's because it is associated with, we believe, the one who came at Christmas, Christ, you know, and he brought hope in hopelessness, light in darkness, and I think that's our thing. So we want to be custodians of hope because we are surrounded, and I'm talking about our context, with a great deal of hopelessness. Yeah. And when we talk about raising the level of sight, it's giving kids and giving young people and young adults and, you know, everybody this idea of there's something more. There's potential here. Yeah. Don't believe the hype that you're nothing. Can we show you the hope? You know. Yeah. And I think that's it. So. The Tory party destroyed this. Thatcher, I was thinking about this quote recently of St. Francis of Assisi, make us channels of peace. I can remember Thatcher saying that.
Yeah. That is not on our election day. Where there is discord. She said that outside Down Street on our election day.
And ruined it. Yeah. But it's kind of like that we want to be channels of hope and peace and love. And that's the gospel message. So first and foremost, I'm a minister of the gospel. And you think, oh, you know, that's that old Christian talk, that Christian word. But beneath that, it's this. We really do believe that this is good news of great joy and great hope. And God is love. And we need to be custodians or channels of that love. Yeah. As his people, and that's my mission statement. Yep. You know.
So. I mean, being a custodian of hope is a fairly decent thing and a fairly positive thing to come at. And I think that phrase that you used, the poverty of aspiration, that's what ties so many people to that sense of hopelessness. That there's an inbuilt poverty of aspiration. And I mean, I know that I don't want to be overly critical of politicians, but they do tend to sow discord. And, you know, they all have to get elected, and they're probably all decent people in their own right. But what are you a custodian of, Chips? What's Chips Fusco?
Well, I suppose a lot of it goes with what Dave says. I mean, especially down when I've been doing all this work for years, you still did agree that the challenge people about young people within my community, Davis, are stereotyped, and they're all hoots, they're all bad down there, and they're going nowhere, you know. So it's a constant battle like that, because you have to, you say, Osprey, lift them up, they can do stuff. And you go look at now, when we grew up, I didn't get any proper education, any exams. I got a no level in history, that was at about a C. That's as far as I got. Even when I came out of jail, nobody was going to university, nobody was doing well, or not very few in my community. But you see now it's so given, which is great. It's natural. Most kids everywhere. Certainly do well, go and get degrees, go and get good jobs. So and that's an achievement itself. And another wee thing I said to young people, for years when I went there, they used to sing, "Where are we from?" And we do it at the field parades. "We're from Divis." They used to sing "Dirty, Dirty Divis." We took them in bus runs, you know, and took us away. But we broke it down and said, "Why are you singing Dirty, Dirty Divis for?" Sing Lovely, Lovely Divis. And Digger takes pride in this in the field every year. We do it in trips now, but they sing Lovely, Lovely Divis.
Do they sing that
instead
now?
of Dirty, Dirty Divis?
Yeah.
And that's what it's about. Look at the positives.
Yeah.
You say people get stuck down. Sure, we're from Divis. That's how we are bad because the media says we're bad.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's challenging that. I think we'll have to a degree moved from it. You know, but you say it's just questions of young people's future to develop because ownership. They can do anything they want.
And is that happening in the schools? Is that changing of that story happening within the schools, in the community as well as the youth work?
Well, we'd hope so, you know what I mean. But schools are a wee bit different, Dave, in a way. They're good. We've built up a better rapport. But for years, many schools just said, see what happens outside the rest and all. And I'm thinking, damn to do with us.
Yep.
Damn to do with us. As long as they bring in here, a lot of that's been broke down, you know, with extended education and all that type of thing.
But I think that sort of, I mean, I remember being struck by it really, really powerfully in Darndale in North Dublin. A friend of mine was a teacher in the school there.
Isn't it?
Yeah, just beside Coolock. And he was saying that the school was in the community, but it wasn't part of the community. He said because what happened was that every morning at between 8 and 8:30, all of these fancy Shogun Jeeps and Beamers and used to drive in to teach the kids in Darndale, and they all headed away at 3 o'clock. So I mean that kind of within a community like Divis, you have moved a big distance in integrating schools in more fully into the community because schools kind of viewed themselves as an oasis within a kind of hostile environment, and that idea that you're coming in from outside to affect change doesn't really work. You know,
and you're right, fair play, but in local certainly, but
it needs to come in. It needs to be homegrown. It needs to resonate with kids because kids are just kids.
Exactly, and it's moved sort of.
But I think that is a move that needs to happen.
Yeah.
That more indigenous teacher. You know,
I suppose we look because where does most young people spend their days? I think in school. If you look at over a period of time, the amount of time they spend in a school. Over a year, the majority would be in the school ground or in the classroom. I
mean, your experience of education. You were saying that you didn't get a proper education in that sense, but then you chose Irish medium education for your child. What was the difference in that? What besides just the language, what was the difference in the schooling that your daughter received?
Well, I always get a sense of then, I suppose, not as well, still now, you can see the ethos of the community from day one. It wasn't like normal education, as in, you say, very abstract and very formal. You knew the language was a passion. You know what I mean? I remember when we started down there.
And the culture now. Yeah.
I remember bringing her over and getting stopped 3 or 4 times on the way over. You know what I mean? Pulled out her car, and then she still remembers this, and even though she was fairly young still at the time, 3 or 4, whatever it was. Getting pulled out of the car and searched. But so you took that sort of passion then, and then you knew they were starting from that, and then you paid, and then you didn't mind and all, and you see it and all, because but then you see now the proud when the Gael skull get built and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So you can see the vast difference there, and you can still see it now. It's sort of, I get a sense of, and even I work with, once you work with me, young people, have nothing to do with the Irish thing, but when I bring them up to sometimes up to Glornamona with Brona does events, young guys in their 20s, they're blown by the ethos of the Irish, the sort of community, the spirit.
Yeah, there's a real
passion. They don't see that in their normal everyday thing, which is always there, which I think is always a plus, you know, and that's always been there from day one, you know, you had to be, I suppose.
Well, that thing, I mean, as you said, it was unusual that people from the working class would pay for their education.
Yeah, but people did then.
People did, and in one of the most impoverished areas, and I'm not saying it's any more impoverished than the Shankill, because it isn't, but in one of the most impoverished areas, a community here carried an education system with no state support, and it's just flourished. And that sense of beginning to reclaim that Presbyterian tradition of the Irish language and involvement in the Irish language, because after all, the Presbyterian Church isn't the Presbyterian Church, it's the Presbyterian Church in Ireland.
That's right.
And that's how it sees itself. So what are the opportunities there for breaking down barriers? Because we could rehearse it all day as to why we are where we are, but the perception is that the Irish language belongs to nationalists, that the Irish language is somehow integrated into Sinn Féin, that it's a Sinn Féin agenda. So how do you begin coming at that from a different angle and breaking down those perceptions?
Well, I think it's part of the history. I mean, it was the Presbyterians that kept that fire lit for years, you know, before that was the perception of it, that it belonged to, you know, one community or the other. So I think that's key within the Irish language. I think about, you know, those dividing walls. How do we, you know, go forward as this, you know, as in our mission? And I suppose it's the change in Belfast, where there's many more internationals coming here and people coming here for refuge. And it'd be about, I think it's important that we reach out beyond the borders, the walls, the division, to embrace those folks who are coming in to find refuge, you know. And we have found that as a great. So we have some members who live around here, but they're not locals, they're not indigenous. They're people who have been placed here by the Home Office, and they're now members of our congregation. So where we would never have done a work on the Falls or had members on the Falls, now we do have members of the Falls. They don't speak Irish. They barely speak English. They speak Farsi, you know. Yeah. But we're and that has bridged a gap, you know, which I think is incredible work.
But I think it's brilliant. I mean, I know that we are in a changing society, and you know, when I come to work in the mornings now, I would have always been saying Majin Moi, I'm now saying Salam Alaikum, and so, you know, so it's great. There's that much more enriching potential, and I know that you can see it all around us. I mean, if you go into the Gael schools, there are kids from Syria.
You see it, it's great.
There are Irish-speaking Syrians now. There are Irish-speaking Eritreans, Irish-speaking Africans, which is great.
Incredible.
I always get deeply saddened when you hear about attacks on newcomers, and it's so ironic that us, the Irish, who's squatting in every country in the world, should not be welcoming of people who are fleeing disaster, you know. But sure, that's the way things are sometimes. But it's tackling those prejudices at all sorts of levels, and trying to find ways that you can negotiate your way through what largely is fear and ignorance. And I mean, how do you see that, Chips, as panning itself out? What do you do to address all the hands that went up and said that they hated Protestants? How do you tackle that?
Well, we're actually just finished. We've been roller at Divis Tower. We actually put a Divis Tower about 10 years ago about one world, one race, one colour. You see it down there, maybe a bit paused, it's faded. So we decided we're replacing that with a new one. You know, Framaher would probably and it's about promoting tolerant respect. I mean, that's what it is about now. It used to be Protestant Catholics, now it's obviously we're now multi-ethnic things, so it's about all different things. So that's getting replaced as we speak. But you still, because I challenge people myself, and I get a wee bit annoyed, and people say I'm not racist, but.
No, I'm not racist,
and,
but.
You know, and you see it, it's fear and ignorance and all, and you see it with Brexit, they're taking our jobs, look at them, they're all coming in and all this in. But I always say to people, but I guarantee you, if your brother, sister, your anybody belong, do you want to America? Well, they're doing well in America, Australia, and they're doing great.
We celebrate that, but they're doing well.
But I like taking somebody's job in Australia. They don't say to me, we're all great at saying that, but no, but they don't get that. I really hit the heart of them because it's so hypocritical. You know what I mean? And people don't realize, but I'm not. But you are. You know what I mean? It's still inbuilt. And you said it's that fear. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but it's I mean, if you're the classic approach of, and you talked about Thatcher, it's that idea of there is no community. We're all individuals.
Yeah.
Oh, disaster.
You know, and greed is good. Like a philosophy that said greed is good literally warped British society. And, you know, obviously we're still very intertwined with events in England, but the temperature is being ranked up in terms of foreigners, the taking our jobs, people, and you know, we now see as Brexit begins to kick in that they're crying out. They can't get enough people to drive lorries to take stuff from A to B. But for us here, how do we, without upsetting the political life within your own community, how do you challenge those views, the views that Chip was talking about? I'm not a racist, but you know, I'm not sectarian, but you know, those are the real challenges.
Like you had said about Nansen.
Yeah.
And Nansen Street is named after
Fridtjof Nansen.
Yeah. And that was the champion of refugees.
Yeah.
And I think it's so we you know, when you're talking to believers who have that, you know, you can challenge them from the scriptures, you know. So I pray often. We work with other groups that are receiving refugees and helping them, and I go back to the book of Ruth, and Ruth is from Moab. She comes to Bethlehem, and the man my son is named after, Boaz, says, "You have come to find shelter under the wings of the Lord." And I say that to people, you know, these people have come to find shelter here. You know, some of them will be chancers, just like us. Just like some of us.
Chancers everywhere.
There's chancers everywhere. Of course. But some of them, genuine, and we want to hope that they find refuge, here, but we as Christians hope that they find refuge under the protection of the Lord. And I'm saying to people, and we want to, as Westkirk, be at the front lines of this. So we're starting a new work in partnership with a group that helps internationals to be at the forefront of that. They offer English classes and to help people settle in. So I think for us, we have to lead the way. And for those of us who are community workers, we have to take the steps and say, look, not that I'm not racist, but almost let me show you how I'm not, you know?
Yep.
And go on that extra mile, be in the wing for someone to find a shelter under, be in that channel of refuge, you know?
Yep.
So I think that's how we challenge it. Preaching, I mean, people tell me all the time, oh, you know, these preachers in the city, you know, whether they're religious or political, that's why they've no respect, because they're all talk. You know, somebody says, you know, talk is cheap, it wouldn't buy you a pint on a Shankill Road. And that's the thing.
I use that commonly, that phrase.
We cannot, you know, there's other ways of putting it, maybe not broadcasting. But we have to practice what we preach, don't we?
Yeah.
If we believe that community is a reality, that Thatcher is wrong on that one, at least that one, then we have to be community people, don't we?
And I think that's that notion that we always talk about the communities. In reality, if you ran a belt across mid Shankill through into the mid falls, down into the lower Shankill North Falls, all of the societal challenges are identical. There's difference, obviously very divided loyalties, but those are areas where we should be able to engender a renewed sense of community, that it's one community, it's an inner city community facing multiple challenges. And if you have leaders that are in their respective communities, but it's time for those leaders to start working more closely together. I'm not saying people don't work, obviously do. I mean, you're in and out of the Shankill Road every week. Yeah. You're in and out of the Falls Road every week. But we're almost like strangers passing each other. And it's that, what I find in all these conversations is that it comes down to individual acts of humanity or kindness. You know, that the fact that Chips Fusco 4 weeks ago didn't know Dave CLosson, or that Dave CLosson didn't know Chips Fusco. Now, you not only know him, you know his daughter, you know his daughter's involved in, and you're beginning to get to know a bit more about Dave. So the podcast is to get you to reflect on that, but it's also to get our audience to see that there's much more commonality of purpose across this city than there is that divides us. And people need to, as you say, have a sense of hope, because there are dark clouds gathering again on the political horizon. And how do we take that temperature down? How do we...
I mean, I just try and be myself. I mean, I say this when I'm on the tours, I keep saying that when I hand over the thing to the loyalists, I say shake his hand, wish him no ill will. Saying he'd still be a loyalist, I'd still be a Republican. I respect his view. We might disagree politically. But 10 years ago, we would have been killing each other, full of hatred. You know, so you can still have, and it's like Martin McGuinness when he shook hands with the Queen's views, he was still a Republican, the Queen was still a royalist. So you can still, it's that there respect. And that's why I try with the young people. Have your views and debate them in a proactive way, but respect other views. Whereas years ago, I hate them because they're there, this and that, that, there. I mean, I think that's where it starts with. You have to get that through, because we can all be different views in a lot of things, but when you've got that, but don't use, you say, your humanity. I mean, I think I've learned that over the years. I mean, I grew up very bitter myself. Do the campus, people were young and thinking you can do, but through time, experience and thing, you learn. You still have your views. You say I'm still Republican, but the humanity's increased. Respect's increased for people. You know what I mean? And I think that's key as well. But then there's a lot of people, I'm not the only one, there must be loads of people like that out there. Loads and loads of them. You know what I mean? Maybe not enough. I mean, not saying exactly it's gone out there, because you can kind of think everybody does with these walls. They all hate each other. Well, it's not the case. Yeah. You know, it's not the case.
And do you think there's seeds sown of that bitterness still? Do you sense there's the seeds of that otherness or seeds of that bitterness? Well,
it's the sense of the other is still very, very strong. I mean, we live. I mean, and it in your own life, you have to keep challenging it. You know, I would hear kids saying, I say, who's Demons? You know, you have to just. I think you challenge it all the time. You can't let it go, because when kids start to reflect on it, they go, well, who is Demons? You know, and it's always Demons. Demons is always, you know, they're doing this or they're doing that, and Demons, and if it's not challenged within the home, and it's not challenged within the schools, then it begins to grow. And kids don't invent these mental constructs; they're given to them. So our generation, who lived through conflict, have a big burden in ensuring that when we look at the legacy that we carry, that we don't perpetuate that sense of the other, and the other being to blame. So it's still there.
And it's hard when the walls are there, and the scars are there, and the scars are being passed down, and you know, in certain situations, and that's the reality, that those things are. We still carry the burden of that. You know,
the very fact with walls, Dave, 25 years after a peace agreement, says a lot, doesn't it? You know, the unfortunate, because while they're and if I make a tour when they're. Whether they're, and the people beside them will say, "Oh, you're not taking that down."
I know, and that's what we hear.
The sad thing.
Like we operate
them down. You know
we operate. Sometimes I say within a stone's throw of the wall. You know, that's where our parish is.
Me and Danny Murphy, when Danny was running St Peter's, you know, the St Peter's Magalada Youth Club, we went over across the New Life. What do you call the guy runs?
Jackie McKee.
Jackie, what was the organ on the ground?
Oh yes, I know that. Tony Mahan. No.
See, our guy, he's been there years,
Okay,
but
okay.
it wasn't Jack, but he's there, he's
Yes.
still there. We went in and they called us in, and we went in across it, we're in the New Life, and we were sitting there, and he was in for me. We actually were, it ended up with the peace time. We were in a meeting like to do with cross community stuff, so it ended up it was the wrong meeting, you know what I mean? But he called us in, we sat down, and there was a lot of wee women all there, you know what I mean? From the shackle, obviously, there, and the first thing said, I hope these walls are not going down there. That was the first thing they said. These walls better not be coming down. That's what me and Danny Muffin, are we in the right meeting here? No, I mean, they're talking about the peace walls.
And I think on the ground that is unfortunately how people feel. They don't feel.
The wall gives you a sense of threat.
It does,
you know,
but also a sense of it's doing something. It needs to be there, and it tells the story. And I mean, middle class people who live nowhere near the peace wall. You know, the latest I heard was, I think, you know, from an organisation, I think we should take it down and plant trees in the place, you know, where it was. And I think, okay, but why don't you ask people who live within the shadow of it, you know?
Yeah, well, the taking down of the wall, I think, although it would be symbolic and it would be significant, it's the psychological walls that you talked about. They're as strong as ever. And it's just breaking those down. Like, I was out for a walk, you know, and I just made conscious decisions. There's no-go areas in the city for me. I'm a citizen of Belfast. I'll go where I want. And I'll, you know, as you say, you have to be careful because there is still a perception of a threat. But I was walking the dog, taking it up around the Springfield, and I heard drumming in the Orange Hall. I'd never heard noise out of it in my life, and I just walked in, and the guy, they're all beating drums, and I said to him, well, what's the crack here? And he says, we're the Shankill old boys, and we're doing it. I says, what is that? He says, but see, to tell you the truth, most of this just keeping kids off. It's doing what you're doing. And I says to him, right. He says, are you from around here? I says, no, I'm Ballymurphy. He says, I was shocked that I had walked in.
Were you actually in the hall?
I went into the hall because the door opened. I'm just nosy. But it's that people just having the confidence.
It needs a bit more of that, doesn't it?
To do that, to just go in and... Because people are just people.
But was he all right with him? Not trying to cry.
I was
Was he saying, that's just good, that's him
but
saying
even
in
we
Orange
say,
Hall,
you know, we both say, was he all right?
Was he all right?
You know, and like the man in Sainsbury's, you know, if he found out, was he all right? Of course he was.
But that shows you what people are like. People are, I'm sure he told you they have
I know, but
or something.
And we carry that perception.
That's it all the time.
You know what I mean?
And it is that thing of just doing things that you wouldn't normally do, pushing yourself to do those repeatedly, and it just becomes normal. And you'll find out that you might get the odd objectionable comment, but so what? For the one objectionable, you get 10 favourable. So look, it's been great talking to the two of you, and I wish you all the luck as you continue doing your work, and I really want to follow up on some of the sieges or so on. And it'd be nice as part of this year of celebration, before we end this year, and it's quickly drawn to a close, that we do a small photographic exhibition of the Albert Street Church for its 50th anniversary. And so we'll chat about that offline.
And I talked to Denker because we started there with our Halloween celebrations, I'm saying, and Denker runs the residence like a senior citizen, so he started showing films. One looks at Darby O'Gill, and he's going to show The Quiet Man, he's going to show It's a Wonderful Life. So he's always interested in that. There'll be a wee option there of building up the sort of wee connection, both sides of the wall, you know what I mean? See where he's at with the Town's End stuff, because he's always keen to work, and then obviously we'll touch base with yourself.
Absolutely,
Dave, you know Denker, because Denker's very, very good and very progressive that way.
Okay, look, well, I just want to thank you both. Chips, Fusco, have you a final message for people listening to the podcast?
Well, I hope that the future and hope, I mean, people can sit down, can still have their views and stuff, but they can still be, the decency just comes through. And comes through, and we all have it. We're taking different people away of getting it out, but everybody's decent deep down. And so when you get that, I think we'll all be a lot better off.
So, Goramilli Mulga, Chips, and Dave, yourself, a final message for
so
our
I mean, as I said to you a moment ago, you know, we sit just beside that Nansen Street, and I have this hope, as a channel of hope, that as we welcome others to Belfast, that there'll not be others, and we'll not be others, but that the city could just be a welcoming place to one another and to others. Whether they're from other places in the world or other parts of the city. So I have that hope that we can be that type of city going forward.
Brilliant. Okay, so Goramilya Mogov, August Goramilya Mogov asked of a guest chat. So Dave CLosson and Chips Fusco, my Shiv.
Thank you.